everybody. Welcome to this week's episode of Se Vuelve Podcast. My name is Monica, and I want to thank you for being here. All right, so in that same introductory week, I think I mentioned that I had to do open house, which is you actually got to meet some parents. So, kids came to visit me, and the good thing is that a lot of those kids knew me from last year. They had seen me in those 2 long terms that I did. The majority of those kids were in those classes, so they knew who I was. And, I was telling them, I'm like, yeah, this was like my little speech. I would say, like, hi, my name is Miss, and I am temporarily covering their teacher, Mr. And yeah, I said it's only supposed to be for a couple weeks, but I'm gonna be with them here. Did let them know because a lot of them I knew. I was like, yeah, but I know this individual from last year, and is there any questions? And a lot of them didn't have any questions, and then there was 2. So I had a parent for a student. The dad was just like, I miss, I have a question. Since we are in the U.S., I just was interested to see what's the ratio of you teaching English and compared to Spanish, because we are in the US and we should assimilate or something in the lines of like that. And in my brain, being overwhelmed, because mind you, this is the second day of work for me, right? And I had to be honest with them, and I said, obviously for me, the language that I primarily speak now is English. And I told the kids this, I think in English all the time. And I said, for me, it's like my goal is to, yes, I'll talk to them in Spanish, but I have been telling them from the beginning, it's like I always want to teach them a little bit in English, or sometimes I'll do Spanglish or whatever. What I ended up doing in that class was that there was some things that I would translate, especially at the beginning, because at the beginning we weren't using their workbooks, which at that time their workbooks in Spanish were not printed at all. Yeah, and I'll just say that because the majority of those kids took those workbooks in Spanish. I think I had maybe majority in English, and I think maybe anywhere between 10, 15 kids maybe took English books. But the majority needed those books in Spanish. The material that I gave them, like PowerPoints, like worksheets, notes, whatever, to fill in, was in English. But what I would do, I would explain it to them in Spanish. And I said, okay, this is what this is saying. And I want you to correlate this word, right? Atoms, átomos, chemicals, químicos. There were words that were very similar, right? And I wanted them to start associating these words in English and in Spanish and understand, because I know that they're also children, right? So also get them to try. And I'll say that because I know that last year there was this resistance, right? There was this big resistance of when some of their other teachers would talk to them in English, they didn't want to try. And they had to push them. Going back to what these parents were saying, we want them to. But still, I was met with a resistance of why are these presentations in English or whatever. Especially at the beginning, it was easier things. It was easier things. And I only say that because we all know that I am a creative person. I am more leaning language arts, social studies. I am not leaning math and science. The good thing was that the first stuff was easy for me to understand because it was lab safety rules or lab equipment, which most of the stuff was easy to understand, right? They had pictures. The lab safety was don't eat in the lab room. You know what I mean? It was easy for me to teach. It wasn't until we got into further in the curriculum that I was I don't know what this is. But maybe you're thinking, Monica, why are you pushing these students? It was interesting because going back to the first week where we were doing the get to know me, conóceme, right? I ended up doing a little, I think it was 2 pages or something of little simple easy questions. And there was one thing that I asked on there, and it said what do you expect, or what do you want to learn this year? And a lot of them said, I want to learn English. Because once again, met with resistance, I would tell them, and I said, a lot of you guys would like to learn in English, And it's even funny because even some of the students that got comfortable with me, they would tell me, Miss, teach me, talk to me, teach me in English, which obviously at that time I'm I'm your science teacher. I can't be really doing English lessons, right? There's so much that I can say about that whole situation, but I think I'm going to move on kind of like to the next topic. Something that I know my school has been saying, and also teacher TikTok. I very much agree with this statement. A lot of the behaviors that I was seeing at the end of last school year completely rolled onto this school year. It was almost like June happened, like, what was it, like 2 months before? And it was like coming into the next day. I remember in my first week and a half, actually, we'll say like 2 weeks of being like working this assignment, I had wrote the one kid up like twice. And that started to kind of like trickle throughout like the school or my grade level, right? Then I got on teacher TikTok, and a lot of people started to say, I'm exhausted. I'm exhausted. Me, I was exhausted. And I'm like, I agree with y'all. Like, we're all exhausted. A lot of the teachers were saying that these behaviors tend to kind of like pick up kind of like later, like in November, December, or maybe even like next year once the kids get like comfortable around other people. Like I said, it was like it rolled. It went from June to like August, but it was like there was like no separation. Like those misbehaviors like continued, which ultimately kind of made my job difficult. I had 5 class periods. I had one that it's like kind of like an homeroom. There's a different name for it. Then I had like my period 2, period 3, period 4, period 5. And I will say my period 2, they were good. They were like calm. They, for the most part, no major issues with them. My period 3 was a complete other story. Even though I do have like very smart kids in that, those individuals are very much like, well, there was the one kid that I wrote up twice in that week was in that class, and he just made the whole environment of the class like terrible, to the point that I had the tables like arranged kind of like against each other. So there would be like kind of like 4 people on one table, or between 2 tables, sorry. I had to move the tables around to line up by themselves because it was too much. Like they were constantly goofing around and misbehaving. So we had like our talkers, or blurter outers, and you have the one that's like constantly like causing like misbehaviors, even to the point that the one that he's so sweet and he's smart and he's a leader, I'm gonna say that he was like doing goofy stuff. He was like going on his computer and playing like like YouTubing weird noises and like playing them. And I would have like one-on-one conversation with him and like tell him like, you're one of our leaders. Like I expect higher expectations from you. Next to him was another girl who was also chosen as one of our leaders. She's great. She's fantastic. Don't get me wrong. But I know a lot of the times she would be eating in class. I'm gonna say this because in case my other like bilingual parents listen to this, they don't believe it. She would be doing her makeup, she would be eating, and they're like, no, because she doesn't do that in my class. Well, she doesn't do that in your class, but she does do that in our class. Also, there is a proven, how do I say, it's a theory or like a science experiment for me that I've been saying is that their behaviors in a lab room with those lab tables is completely different than when they are in the other teachers' classrooms and they have like these like smaller individual desks. I don't know what it is, but now it's been 2-3 years now that for some reason they lose their like minds like in these lab tables. It's so weird. But that class was a big struggle for me because it's hard when, you're there to do a job, which is to teach them, and you can't teach because you're constantly having to like redirect kids and tell them like, please sit down and please be quiet and this and that, and you're interrupting, all that. Then my period 4, that class was not that bad. That class was also very calm. It was like smaller, which was nice. I think at that point we had 14 kids in that class. And, I did have one that was like a talker. That wasn't that bad. And then my 5th period class. So that class was mostly girls. And there was one boy that was also very mature and like responsible. But we had like a group of 4 boys. The one was just he's just like wanting to bounce off the walls, and the other ones are like kind of like, well, 2 other ones are like followers, right? They're actually they're short, they're petite, and they want to fit in, so they get involved with him. And then the other one that's also I felt like he was more manageable because I feel like I could go talk to him in the hallway and I could reason with him, whereas the one was just like bouncing off the walls and you couldn't. The good thing about that class is that that class had some of our smartest like individuals, and on top of it, they were very self-aware to the point that they would come up to me and they would say, Miss, today's going to be an amazing day because this person and this person was not there. And sure enough, like that day, we would be like, hi, and like having a great time. Like the environment was completely different. And it just kind of shows, because even for the third period class, when the one individual was not there, that class was even like more manageable. The TikToks that I've been seeing, like these teachers are not lying. Like they're not lying, they're not exaggerating. This year, and I'll speak for my former grade level, our students had over, and which is a majority, had over 200 and something referrals. And that's because, they're not following expectations, they're not following directions, they're interrupting, whatever. There's all these like little things. They don't have the materials, or computers are not charged. It's funny because there's a TikTok where the person's like, oh, if you, in case you're wondering why I haven't texted you back or called you back or whatever, right? And that's like a teacher saying that, and in the background you just hear like 6 7. Oh, my computer's not charging. I charged my computer. Oh my, like da 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 da. Like this person's doing this. Yeah, it's overwhelming. It's a lot. And once again, I always give credit to the teachers, and I believe the teachers because I don't know what's going on with like kids. There's this weird disconnect where these kids, they're not afraid of like consequences, and they also don't respect like the teachers. And I can't say all of them, right? But there's a good chunk of them, right? To the point where obviously like we're trying to figure out like what can we do to have these like students care, because at this point they're not caring. We don't know what else to do. We're going to end it there. As always, I just want to say thank you to anyone who tunes in to listen. I would appreciate it if you could leave a review, and would be grateful if you could let me know what information resonated with you. Please follow and share on social media. The pages are at Se Vuelve Podcast, or my personals at Se Vuelve Monica. Once again, thank you so much for listening. Nos vemos pronto. Talk to you soon. Bye, everybody.